Thank you for watching this video about the Thinking Skills Assessment Test, or the TSA, which we use in Oxford for around about a fifth of our applicants for undergraduate admissions. I suppose we should begin by saying that this video is being prepared in the spring of 2021, and therefore in the midst, maybe towards the end of the effects of the pandemic. Because of that, we don't know how things will look in the autumn of this year, 2021, let alone any future years that this video may still be found online and available to watch for. So we should emphasise that you should always be looking for the latest information online about the test, but that a good deal of what we say in this will apply in any year and however the test is taken. The talk will have three main parts. One of them will be about what the test is like. Another will be about how we use the test as selectors in Oxford to discriminate between candidates who on paper maybe look really quite similarly qualified to do any of the degrees that we're using this test for. And I hope that by knowing a little bit about how the test is used, you'll be a little more comfortable about taking it and understand a little bit more about what we're looking for from you. Then the third section is about how to prepare for the test and the sorts of things you need to do before the test is actually sat. One of those things will be to register for the test, which doesn't happen automatically, and you'll need to find out about how to do that and how the test is sat and when it's sat by looking on the university website. Those details again may possibly change as the pandemic situation continues, so do keep your eyes on updates as they come. Now, who's this video for then? Well, it's for whoever has to take the TSA for Oxford admissions, and that group for the 2021 admissions round, for the round in the autumn of 2021, will include people applying for human sciences, for geography, for economics and management, for PPE, that's philosophy, politics and economics, for psychology, philosophy and linguistics, or PPL, and for experimental psychology, as well as those applying for history and economics. It isn't the case that all of those people will have to take the whole of the test, and we'll say a bit more about that in a minute. But again, because these videos can sometimes hang around for a year or two, it's always going to be worth looking for the latest information for whichever degree it is that you are applying for. We should also say that this is specifically a video for Oxford's use of the TSA. I can't imagine that there will be terribly different stories to tell in other universities that use these tests or tests very much like them, so you may pick up some hints and tips even if you're not applying to Oxford. But the video is really very specifically intended for applicants to Oxford who are taking this Thinking Skills Assessment test. So what's the test actually like? Well, up until 2020, the test was a traditional paper and pen test. You were given a script booklet to write in. And it may be that at some point that will re-emerge as the way that the test is taken. In 2020, with the conditions of the coronavirus pandemic around us, the test was moved to being an online one. So you would sit at a computer and you would answer the test online by typing it. And it may be that in 2021 that will still be the way the test is taken. That decision hasn't been made yet. So it's going to be worth keeping an eye on things just to see, as the situation develops, what the test will be like. There are three key things to say about the test. One is that it lasts 2 hours. The second is that it has 2 sections. And a third is that it tests 3 skills. But you'll see that 2 of those have those slightly weaselly kind of footnote markers that take you off somewhere where you're told that you can't spend this coupon on postage stamps, or you've got to be over 18 to apply, or something like that. In this case, what these things do is to remind me to say, first of all, that the test lasts 2 hours, except for 2 situations. One is if you already are given additional time to sit tests at school. If you're given additional time, then you will get that additional time. For this test, we want you to have the normal allocation of additional time that you would get for sitting an exam, a GCSE or whatever other sort of exam you might sit. We want you to have that time. So if you are given 10 minutes extra in each hour, your exam will last for 2 hours and 20 minutes. The second situation about the time, though, also relates to the sections, and that is that two groups of people, those applying for economics and management and those applying for history and economics, will only do the first section of the test. And that first section isn't the whole of the 2 hours, obviously. So they won't have a 2-hour TSA test. The three skills we'll come to in a moment, but let's start by thinking about what the two sections are like. So the first section is a multiple choice section. It's got 50 questions, each of them have 5 possible answers, and you've got 90 minutes out of the 2 hours to do the multiple choice section in around about 100 seconds per question, so quite rapid fire. Then the second section, which isn't taken, as I say, by two groups, history and economics and management students, that's an essay, and you're given, if on paper, 2 sides of A4, and if you're doing it typing, then you will be given some word limit that's intended to be an equivalent of the 2 sides of A4 limit. We are not interested in you writing as much as you can, so don't treat the limit as something to aim at. We're interested in you writing the best essay you can in answer to the questions that we ask. So 2 sections, multiple choice and essay, but the essay isn't done by those applying for either economics and management or history and economics. Those applying for history and economics will do the history aptitude test instead of the part 2 of this TSA, and they'll get to do their writing in that part. Now, what are the 3 skills that we're testing? The 3 skills are critical thinking, problem solving, and essay writing. And the first 2 of those are tested by the multiple choice questions. The essay writing is, of course, tested by the 30-minute essay section, and that's also interested in various aspects of critical thinking too, I suppose, be it by your construction of arguments and so forth. But these 3 elements, critical thinking, problem solving and essay writing, are the essence of the TSA test for those who do both parts. So now we know what the test is like. What's it for? Why do we set an extra test on top of all of the normal university admissions procedures that you'll go through? One thing we might do to start off answering that question is to think about the things we already know about you. And we'll know about those things from that university admissions form that you submit through UCAS. So here are 4 things that we'll know. We'll know your existing examination results. We'll know your GCSE performance, for example. We'll have a UCAS reference that will tell us a little bit about your academic personality, and will tell us about any particular challenges you may have faced on the way to performing as you have done in your exams. We'll have predicted examination results for any exams that you haven't yet taken, and we'll also, of course, have your personal statement that will say a little bit about your motivation to study the courses that you've applied for, and why it is that you think you're well placed to be a good applicant for them. So we actually know quite a lot about you. What might we want to know about you? We want to know if you have intellectual stamina. We want to know if you have the stickability to cope with the demands of an Oxford degree. One of my colleagues calls the degrees we offer marathons and not sprints. And we want to know something about your ability to cope with academic study over a reasonable period of time. We want to know things about subject learning and skills. Some of those will be really quite specific things. So, for example, for economics and management, they will want you to be studying maths at A-level or the equivalent of A-level, and they'll want you to be doing really well at it. It may be slightly less precise than having an A-level in maths. It might be something like psychology, wanting you to be studying something mathematical or scientific, as providing some sense of your ability to cope with the demands of an experimental, a scientific subject. So there might be either quite precise or slightly less precise concerns about subject learning and skills, but we might also be interested in core aptitudes for studying things that you're not studying at the moment. So those might be the core thinking skills that we want to know about, whether you have the ability to be taught the things that we will be working with you on in the course of a degree. And we want to know whether you have the capacity to write closely argued and connected English prose. Now let's think about those things in relation to what we know about you. We can tell from your GCSE performance that you've got a reasonable amount of intellectual stamina. You've been working over a period of 2 years or so for GCSEs, and we can see from the range of GCSEs you're doing that the chances are that some of the things you've studied will have appealed to you a bit less than others, but if you've still done well across the board, then that suggests something very positive about you. We can see that you're studying A-level maths, if that matters to us, and what A-levels you're studying. And that also helps us to know quite specific things about you, where that matters to us in our admissions testing. But then beyond that, we might want to know whether you have the intellectual sharpness to cope with the kind of thinking that you'll be required to do on our degrees, and that's not always evident from things on your UCAS form. So we can ask about whether you have the ability to think on the spot in a mathematical way or in a conceptual way, a way dealing with questions in language. And those things we might be able to learn about by additional testing. Similarly, we can tell about your capacity to write closely argued English prose by setting you a test under controlled conditions to do those things. Which means that there are what we could call long game measures, things that we can only tell about by you doing things over a long period of time, intellectual stamina, GCSEs, and shorter game things that we can tell a little bit about by setting you tests that test your ability, your fundamental aptitude to do certain things. The combination of those things is what we're after, and bringing those things together helps us to get a rounded picture of the kind of student you might be, the kind of undergraduate you might be on one of these degrees. What we don't need to do is to repeat in our testing of you anything that we already know from that UCAS form. So we won't be asking you questions as part of the TSA that ask you to repeat things that you might have done at A-level. And in fact, some of the worst essay questions that I can recall as having set in terms of what we've learnt from the answers to the questions have been the ones that have been closest perhaps to something in philosophy A-level or religious studies A-level, where people have been tempted just to give back the sort of essay that they would have written as part of A-level, and it hasn't really paid enough attention to the question that we've asked. Paying attention to the question is something we'll come to in the course of the next section of our talk. So then, how should you prepare for the TSA test? A reminder first that the test comes in 2 sections, and the multiple choice section and the essay section have examples online, so you can have a look at past questions, you can try them for yourself. And there are mark schemes for the multiple choice section that you can look at, so you can test yourself and see how you get on. Now let's begin with a couple of observations, one of which seems absolutely obvious but is worth making, and the other of which may be less obvious but is also worth taking into account. The first observation is that you can only get credit for what you do right. So if you don't do a question, you can't get credit for it. That's quite important because it means that if you leave maybe 10 of the multiple choice questions out, you'll get no credit for them at all. And then the second important thing to say is that you don't lose anything, you don't lose credit for what you get wrong. So most of the multiple choice questions will come down to an answer that's either one or another, one of 2 of the 5 offered to you. So you've got 5 answers that you can choose between. Some of them will be pretty obviously wrong. And when you get to a point where it's between one and another of the 2 answers that you've chosen as possible, then if you really can't make your mind up, guessing gives you a 50-50 chance of being correct. But you won't lose any marks if you're wrong. So that may be helpful to know, just to give you an idea for strategy. So then, the multiple choice questions. Now remember, these come in 2 styles, critical thinking and problem solving, and they're mixed up in the test. So you'll have a problem solving question, and there may be 2 critical thinking ones, and then another problem solving 1 or 2. And that's deliberate. It's done so that if you don't get to the end of the 50 questions, we'll still have a score for you on each of these 2 important things that we want to know about you. So here then is an example of a critical thinking question. As I read it out, I'll read the block of text. You can see the general style of it: a block of text, question, and 5 possible answers. The decline in voter turnout at elections is chiefly explained by the decline in voting by younger people. Older people are much more likely to vote. If this trend continues, we will reach a point at which no government can be said to have a mandate to govern, as the number of voters will be too small to indicate the wishes of the majority. We need therefore to find an alternative to conventional elections so that the wishes of the people can be heard. Now, let's think about what quite a bad strategy would be for answering this question. I think a bad strategy would start by thinking, well, why is it that older people vote and younger people don't? Now, the answer might be all sorts of things, I suppose, but one of them might be that older people were brought up on Enid Blyton books. And being brought up on Enid Blyton books, having read those as a child, you probably developed an affection for dogs, because most Enid Blyton books have dogs in them. And as everybody knows, the best thing about elections is the Twitter hashtag dogs at polling stations. So old people are attracted to elections because of dogs at polling stations. Now young people, of course, being brought up on Harry Potter books, won't be nearly as affectionate towards dogs as they will towards maybe cats or owls or snakes. So if only there were a Twitter hashtag owls at polling stations, or cats at polling stations, or snakes at polling stations, then actually younger people might be more inclined to vote. Now all of those are really quite good and important thoughts, I suppose, in their way, and maybe we should tell the Electoral Commission about them. But before we do that, we should stop, and we should think 100 seconds per multiple choice question, and we should think of a better strategy, because we're not going to get an answer this way. So let's go back and look at the question. So the question is about older people and younger people voting. That's true, we got that bit right. But the actual question is, which of the following best expresses the flaw in the above argument? And then there are 5 alternatives. If you start free thinking on the passage, if you start thinking about what it means and what a good answer might be to the thought of the passage, you might miss the fact that your thought isn't any of the 5 thoughts that you're offered. So instead, you should very quickly look at the question, look at what you're being asked, and look at the 5 possible answers, because only one of those will be the answer that you should give. In this case, for example, we could have a look and we could see that all European countries have seen a decline in voter turnout. Might be, that's C, that's a possible flaw in the above argument. But I don't think it mentions Europe anywhere, or makes any particularly special consideration for Europe in the passage, so that seems like it might not be particularly relevant or important. And A, there may be problems in using alternatives such as internet and postal voting. Well, there may be problems in using alternatives, but old people seem able to vote and young people aren't voting, and internet and postal voting might be just as significant for the old as for the young. So that doesn't seem to be a particular flaw. I think if you look at E, people who are young now may become more likely to vote as they get older. That actually looks quite a plausible kind of thought as a problem with the passage. It may well be that always, at all times, younger people were less likely to vote than older people, and young people on the whole have a tendency to become older people in time, and that might mean that they also become more likely to vote. There may be a problem with voter turnout, but it doesn't seem to be that that thought has been captured in the passage, the thought that younger people become older and might become more likely to vote. So I suspect that the correct answer here is probably E. For problem solving, we then look at a question that looks a little bit like this. Now, although most problem-solving questions will have numbers attached to them, it may be that the answer itself isn't a number, and in this case the answer is going to be a month because it's a data analysis sort of question. What you need to do is to look at the question. Below is a summary of the second-hand cars sold by Bargain Cars during 2012 and 2013. Now again, don't get into thinking, would I buy a second-hand car from Bargain Cars? That's probably not the track to go down. Look at the question. The question is, which month of 2013 saw the highest increase in sales compared with the previous month? Now what that does immediately is to tell you that the part of this little table that's about the car sales in 2012 is completely irrelevant to any answer you give, because we're comparing one month with another, and the months we're comparing are all within 2013. The reason we know that is because January 2013 isn't an answer, so even December 2012 isn't a relevant month. So you first of all need to say April, June, July, September and November are the only months that are going to matter, and only in 2013. And you then compare April with March, June with May, July with June, and so on, and you work out which of these saw the greatest increase. April looks like it's a pretty good bet for this, sees quite a big increase of 27 cars over the previous month. Then you look at June to May, which is only 16, July to June, which is only 18, and so on until you come to the correct answer. This is one where knowing which is the correct answer will be pretty straightforward once you've worked through it, and the thing you needed to spend the better part of your 100 seconds doing was reading the question, working out what was required, and then discounting, very quickly discounting, all of the information that didn't matter, so you could concentrate on the stuff that did. Now you'll have 50 of these questions to do, and it'll be obvious even from having looked at a couple of them that this is going to be pretty demanding. It's going to be demanding question by question, and it's going to be relentless for the 90 minutes. You're just going to have to keep doing question after question. But this is testing your accuracy of thinking and reasoning under pressure, and that's a useful way of us learning some of these shorter game measures, as I called them earlier on, the things that tell us how you think on the spot. It doesn't tell us all that much except across a 90-minute span about what your stamina's like for work, but it does tell us some useful things. For those who go on to do the essay, remember that's not everybody, but for those who go on to do the essay, we now need to think about how this looks. When you're given the essay questions, you'll be given a list of 4. And the 4 essay questions are intended to cover the sorts of interests that people might have who apply for the quite wide range of degrees that this is a test for. But you don't need to look at them and think, which is my one? I've applied for a psychology degree, so which is the psychology question? You can look at them and you can work out for yourself which is the one that you feel you've got something to say about, and you can approach that. So here's a set of 4 questions that we've set in the past. Notice that the instruction at the top is very clear. You must answer only one of them. Each year somebody will end up trying to do all 4. You only have a very short time and space to answer the question in. You really are only asked to answer one. And here are the 4 questions that were set on this particular paper and in a particular year in question. Should children strike to demand action on a major issue such as climate change? Assume that automated face recognition technology is completely reliable. What restrictions, if any, should there be on its use? Could somebody choose to change their race? Should the main objective of a business be to make money? The first question, should children strike to demand action on a major issue such as climate change, is one which in another video I've taken on in some more detail. Children could cover all from about 4 years old maybe to something like 15 or 16 years old, and you might feel that you'd want to say very different things about a 15 or 16-year-old striking than you would about a 4 or 5-year-old. If that's so, then that's a distinction you'll want to make in your answer. Similarly, a major issue such as climate change is intended to signal something. It's intended to signal that this is actually not a question about climate change. A number of answers I read spent a lot of time talking about why climate change was a major emergency, a significant issue. But having said that, there wasn't then very much about why one might strike or not strike in some of those answers, on what other major issues might be things that would give rise to the need to strike. It's good if you recognise that climate change is a major issue and then say why, because that might help us to see which other major issues there might be. But it's not really a question about climate change or even about the other major issues. It's a question about, are there major issues that might be significant enough to provoke children to strike? Then the second question, assume that automated face recognition technology is completely reliable. What restrictions, if any, should there be on its use? Look at the style of question. It's asking you to assume that something is true. If you spend most or all of your essay fighting the assumption, you won't be answering the question, because the question asks you to make the assumption, to say we have completely reliable face recognition technology. There is, though, a question what it means for the technology to be completely reliable, and I assume that it probably means if the technology is applied to somebody's face, their identity is perfectly assessed by the technology, so we know from the face recognition technology exactly who it is. That's quite an impressive feat, because it implies that identical twins, for example, would be able to be told apart, or at least I suppose it would. But we might very well need to say early on in our essay what we were taking it to mean when we say that face recognition technology is completely reliable. If you make the assumption that it's completely reliable, then having made that assumption, you are starting to answer the question. You've said what it means, and now you need to think about what restrictions, if any, there should be on its use, where it can be used and where it mustn't be used. In giving an account of where it could be used, you might then think, well, would somebody argue back against this and say it shouldn't be used there? And I would have thought for almost any use that you might propose for it, there might be somebody who would be nervous about that. So you could say why they're mistaken, or you could say why it is that even though they do have a point, the reasons that you're giving would outweigh the reasons why they might be concerned. Or you might possibly think that if face recognition technology were completely reliable, that would be a reason to be very nervous about its use at all. So there's lots of sides to this that we could imagine being drawn out, and there isn't a single correct answer. Many of the questions we ask will be ones where there is a balance of view on both sides, and we want you to think on paper or on screen if it's a typed essay, think through for us an argument for one side or the other, and then to give some sense of how that argument counters any of the arguments that might go the other way. The third question is, could somebody choose to change their race? Now, I can imagine a cheeky sort of answer that might say, there's no such thing as choice. All of us are completely predetermined by some way that the world is, so because there's no choice, obviously there's no choice to change your race because there's no choice for anything. But I don't think, clever as it might seem, that's actually a very helpful sort of answer here. So I'm going to do the same thing I've done with the others and point out a couple of words. The first one is the word could. So it's not should or would it be a good idea, it's could. Is it possible? Could somebody choose, and in this case, could somebody choose to change their race? And the reason the word race is highlighted is because obviously pretty much all of the answer is going to depend on what we mean by race. So you're going to need to define what you mean by race. I had a quick look in a dictionary to see what it said, and as I'd expected, race is something that is controversial. There were definitions of race that worked around perceived characteristics, and where really the whole weight of what race somebody belonged to was about perception and about the construction of a certain kind of identity. On the other hand, there were definitions that anchored in things like culture and language, which, however much they may not be absolute and exact things, whether somebody's a speaker of English or not, for example, seems a pretty precise thing. You can or you can't, and then there will be people who are better and worse, people who can do it more and less well. But whether you belong to a certain kind of culture, whether you speak a certain kind of language, if that defines race, then while somebody might be mistaken in thinking that you belong to that culture or you speak the language, that won't be a mistake about whether the distinctions between races are real or not. So you'll need to do a bit of thinking about that, about obviously somebody can learn a new language, they can move to a new place. Is that a reason to think that they could change their race? Not having a clear account of what race is going to undermine having a good answer to this question. Then the last question on the sheet was, should the main objective of a business be to make money? And a lot of discussions in actual answers to this question bypassed the question of what a business is. A good number of them spoke about charities, and spoke about charities as if it was straightforwardly the case that a charity was a business. There are businesses that are not-for-profit businesses, and they may share a good many things in common with charities. There are certainly businesses the aim of which is to maximise value for their shareholders. That's a phrase that you may well have come across if you've studied any economics. But the phrase in the question that matters then, once we've decided what a business is the main objective. Even maximising shareholder value isn't necessarily about only making money. You could make money in the short term, or you could make money in the long term. You could make money reliably, expect still to be in business in 20 years' time, by building up a reputation for honesty, loyalty, good customer service that might in the short term cost you money, but they might in the longer term make you money, Or, amongst other things, they might keep your employees in work, and they might do a good number of things that you regard your business as being very important for. So people are proud to work for you because of your reliability and so on in terms of the products you make or the services you provide. But the question here is about the main objective. Is it the main objective of a business to make money? And the answer there will, I suppose, depend on the kind of business it is and what it's for, and recognising that there might not be a one-size-fits-all answer to a question like this would be a very good way of going about it. But if you are going to go for that sort of an answer, you need to do it by discriminating quite clearly between why, for some businesses, it might be true that their main objective is to make money, whilst for other businesses it might not be the case that that's so. What's the difference? Don't give a sort of rather vague answer. Be as precise as you can, with all of the questions, be as precise as you can about why you are saying what you are saying. So there we are, 90 minutes of multiple choice questions, half an hour to write an essay, the 2 hours of the test. What do we need to say then about how you can approach practicing? Well, when you do practice, one of the things you need to do, and this is true for the essay as well as for the multiple choice questions, is to practice your timing. In fact, I think that after you've done 2 or 3, maybe at most, of the practice papers, you probably won't get any more at all out of the actual approach to the questions. What matters is that you're able to get through enough of the questions in the limited amount of time that you have. So do practice timing and practice it for the essays as well. Recognise how short 30 minutes is and how little time you have to plan. One thing that you can do with the planning is to choose the question which it seems to you admits for you of the quickest way towards a good answer. Do register on time. We ask you to register by the same deadline as UCAS, 15th of October. You can register earlier than that, but registration is not the same as applying for the degree through UCAS. It won't happen automatically. For most people at school or college, where the registration for their exams happens through an exams officer, it may very well be your exams officer at school who will register you for the TSA. But you must make sure that happens. Each year we find that something's been overlooked or something wasn't sent in. You must be registered on time, so it's worth making sure that you are registered. And then do check online for updated information. Once you're registered, if there are any updates, then you should be told those. You should have a communication from either the testing body or your college to let you know that there are any changes. But up to the deadline, do have a look every so often, maybe every couple of weeks, on the website just to check.
So I found the practice papers really useful. I ended up going through the specimen paper, I think, not under time conditions, and the rest of them I sort of, in the 3 or 4 weeks leading up to the actual tests, I sort of did those at progressively smaller intervals. I tried, one thing I did do was I gave myself less time than the paper would to get myself used to like an even harder pace so that the actual test would feel a bit easier. One thing I found really helpful was I had a couple of friends going for the TSA as well, and just talking over some of the questions we found difficult was really useful, looking at different ways to approach the questions.
Yeah, also looking at keywords. So I feel like a lot of times if you just look at these keywords, you can kind of identify what you have to focus on, because it is quite a lot of text to read and you can't read everything in depth. So it's about, identifying the key things. I think it was really helpful for me.
So I would say I probably started prep maybe in mid-September, And in the beginning, I just tried to sort of do like maybe a paper a week initially, like not under time conditions. And like Shiv said, I was really lucky to have a couple of people around me who were taking the TSA or similar tests. I think there are questions on the BMAT that are quite similar as well. And we could sort of discuss them and go through them. And it was just about making sure, like Anna said, I knew like the mechanics of the questions and sort of how the test functioned practically. And then as we got closer to the actual time of the test, I suppose I started focusing more on time conditions and making sure I could get all the questions done in the time frame given, and starting to up my prep a little bit. But yeah, initially quite slowly, just trying to understand sort of how the test actually worked before really drilling down on time practice.
For me, I'm one of those people that needs the security in their mind before they go into a test. And I think because it's such a time pressured, sometimes it's easy to get into the mentality, I only have one shot at this. So having that preparation of having done the test in the right format, you know, in that set time limit many times before you do the actual test, helps you to feel more secure. I also, while I was doing preparation, when I came across a question that it took me a while to get my head around or I found quite difficult, I kept a note of that. So I think on the day before the test, because those are the kind of questions that really worried me. So on the day before the test, just looking over those, reminding myself of the logic, the method to complete them, helped me to feel more confident.
I think I remember it being obviously quite a nerve-wracking experience, but not I mean, it was very similar in experience to taking any other kind of exam. It was in the same place, the same kind of, we had a few people taking various admissions tests on the same day. And so we were all kind of lined up, and it kind of felt a lot like taking any other kind of exam. I think that's probably a good way to kind of think about it, because it is very similar in that sense.
I think like the 2 or 3 days before the TSA, I didn't even look at the questions or anything, because I was like, I just need a clear mind, and literally just had like a few days of intense self-care and sleeping lots, because I felt that actually just having a clear mind and being well rested was way more useful than like having so many questions, because there's also only that much that you can do. So I think it's actually way more valuable to start preparing beforehand and leave yourself plenty of time to rest in between, and especially before the test. And on the day, so I did it in a test center, which was massive and very stressful because I'm from Austria. And I remember it was like, actually it made me a bit nervous that there were so many people, but actually what I found really nice is to just chat to others and realize that you're all equally nervous and it's fine. And then it's like it's also not the biggest thing counting towards your application. So I think that helped me to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do my best, but it's not everything.
In terms of during the test, I would say the main thing is I know I had a moment right at the beginning where I sort of couldn't do a question, and I think panic can kind of build up inside of you. And I think it's really important to remember to just treat each question individually and move on if you can't do it, and don't get too hung up or overwhelmed on sort of any one question, because it is taken holistically. And so that would be sort of the main thing I think I felt. But like everyone said, it is pretty much sat like any other test or exam that you take. So don't expect anything too wildly different, and try to be calm, be rested, and treat it as well as you can, I suppose.
I think my TSA ended up being in the middle of my half term, which was really, really helpful, because as Anna did, I did just take a few days off, and I could because I didn't have school beforehand. Although I did stress about it, like Liberty, in that I ended, especially section 2. So while I did get a lot of sleep and didn't really do any TSA questions, I did sort of obsessively go through the news in case anything might help me when writing an essay. On the day itself, my test was, I think, in the morning, and I did have a moment of panic where I wasn't sure if I got my stationery together or something like that. So I think that's very important, just making sure all the little things go right, because it really is a test of your mental balance and like agility, which can change based on very small things.
On the day, it felt a bit like a casual exam, just because we didn't do it in our exam hall, which is just like the sports hall that we normally do it in. It was just in a classroom with like a few of us doing like various admissions tests on the same day. So it was just fairly like it was like a lot of my mates happened to be doing it, so we were just sort of having a chat before. And I'm sort of very much a person not to cram, and especially with the TSA where it's not content based, like it's been said already. I just sort of thought like a couple of days before, I was like, well, if I haven't got it now, then I don't think I'm going to get it in a couple of days' time. So I thought I'll just give it my best shot. And it was very much like, it felt very different to what A-levels felt like, and it was very much just sort of give it your best shot and see what happens, rather than like, I need to like perform to get this mark, to get this grade or whatever. It was more just like trying your best, I guess, because it wasn't as much pressure on remembering things.
I think it's just really important to emphasize to like read the entire of like all of the questions. And one thing that really helped me to do that was bringing a highlighter with me and just actually going through and highlighting the key points of the questions, because I think that really makes sure that you read and don't miss any of the information, because a lot of the sort of answers rely on quite subtle bits of information, and that can really help to highlight them.
And on the day of the test, I sat my test in school, and so I had a bunch of friends who were doing similar sort of tests, entrance tests. So beforehand, we promised ourselves no revision questions. We're not even going to talk about it. And when you get into the exam hall, immediately the adrenaline kicks in. And I think it's important to factor in that on the exam day, your mental is even more acute than it normally would be. At least that's what I found. And like Liberty was saying earlier, when it comes to a question that you stumble across, because that always happens, just taking just a moment to ground yourself and then moving on to the next question. And then because it's positively marked, towards the end of it, just leaving a few minutes, if you miss anything out, just to have your best shot at guessing even is the best way to go about it.
And I also kind of skipped all the questions that I just didn't get past in like within 1 minute or so, and then just did them in the end. And I remember like at the very end, I was just really wildly guessing things, because you might as well try.
Another thing was on the kind of guessing point, which I think is obviously is definitely a good idea, because you've got nothing to lose. But often with the questions, there will be kind of fairly obvious things that you can rule out. And then if you can sometimes rule them down to kind of 2 options, and that obviously makes your chance if you're guessing a lot better. So even if you kind of look at a question and you think, well, I don't know how to get the actual answer to this, but you may well be able to think, well, it's definitely not that. And if you can do that a few times, then you can probably get a few marks just from guessing stuff at the end.
When it comes to the critical thinking questions, the ones that have a big chunk of text that you're expected to read really quickly, having a really quick skim read of the answers is really helpful, because it means when you're reading the main extract of the text, you'll pick up on things and recognize things that will help you answer the question.
And I definitely agree on the points about like the panic over specific questions. And I remember I had it quite early on in the TSA as well, like it was something like question 2 or 3 on the multiple choice, where I just looked at it and thought, I just don't know what's going on here. But I just left it and came back at the end. And I think that's definitely like 100% the way to go, because your time is more valuable than the one question that you're going to get like hung up on and spend 5 minutes on.
One thing I did was occasionally you get an answer and you're fairly certain of it, but something just feels wrong in your gut. So I often had this, and when I did my practice papers, it would turn out maybe like half of the time it was just because I'd got it wrong or made a stupid mistake on it. So during the exam, if I got an answer but I still had a weird gut feeling about it, I'd just draw a big star next to it on the paper, and then at the end I'd have some time left and go through the starred questions maybe 2 or 3 times just to double check.
Their essay, I think like the value of planning is sort of like is so high with the TSA essay, because you can't actually write that much because you're sort of physically limited to 2 sides of A4. So I think like I think it's half an hour, if I remember right, to write the essay. I think I probably spent about 10 minutes of that planning, because I just found it really helps with the sort of conciseness of the essay, which is sort of what they're looking for. They're not looking for like a mastery of the sort of, to some degree, random content that comes up in the essays.
one thing I found really helpful when it comes to doing the whole paper is there's a lot of YouTube videos that you can find that go through entire papers, and they go through the thought process and the techniques. They'll talk about, well, this question you want to spend more time on, or yeah, that sort of thing. So YouTube was super helpful.
So that's really all we need to say about the test. A 2-hour test in 2 sections with plenty of past papers available on various websites for you to go and have a look at and to practice. There's some guidance about writing the essays on the university website, and you should be able to find those and have a look at them. Maybe try the essay first and then look at what the guidance is about what might have been said about it. What we're after here is you thinking for us. It's your thinking skills that are being assessed here. And if we can get an idea from your answers to the essay question and your multiple choice answers of your thinking skills, then we'll be in a very good position to use those alongside all of the other information that we have on your form to come to a mind about whether you should be invited for interview. And then all of that information, along with the interview, will be taken into account when we're deciding who to make an offer of a place to. Even after we've interviewed you, it will still be part of our overall assessment of you at the end of our deliberations about whether we make you an offer or whether we don't. Thank you again for watching this video and for engaging with the admissions process. We wish you well with this, whether you apply to Oxford or whether you apply to other universities in the end. Thank you.